For how many terms should African leaders be in office? Do African leaders respect the will of the people? Is democracy in Africa a myth? Do the African Union and Pan-African Parliament serve their intended purpose? What time is it? It is question time. Hello and welcome to the show. My name is Mpho Tsedu. The small Central African country of Burundi has recently experienced violent protests ever since President Pierre Nkurunziza registered to run for a third term due to an apparent technical clause in the constitution. The bone of contention here is that his first presidential term did not count since he was appointed by parliament and not elected. President Nkurunziza has been at the helm since 2005 after a 13-year civil war ended following the signing of the Arusha Peace Deal in 2006. Among renowned mediators of the Arusha Agreement were the late South African President Nelson Mandela, Tanzanian leader Julius Nyerere. Meanwhile, President Nkurunziza has postponed the Burundian elections to June 6th, although regional leaders had preferred a longer period. But why do some African leaders stay in office for so long? A reminder that this is a live program, therefore you can call us. The number to dial is on the screen, 089-110-4210, 089-110-4210. If you're outside the borders of South Africa, please prefix that with +27. My guest today, Aisha Kaji, is a political analyst, and from our Pretoria studios, we have Richard Irionya, who is also a political analyst. And we would expect that perhaps you could then add your voice onto this wonderful program, Question Time. The number to dial, 089-110-4210 it is. Welcome to the show. Thank you. Let me welcome you also, Rich. Now, Aisha, you're very critical of African leaders who don't want to retire. Absolutely. What would a 51-year-old man retire for?
Well, if he's had 2 terms in office and 2 shots at governing the country that he's the president or the head of state of, I think that's quite enough. And he can retire and go into business, take up some farming, maybe pursue a few hobbies,
which is football,
work for an NGO, do some volunteering, lots of things he could do.
But one of the reasons, and this is the view of some of the analysts, are saying Nkurunziza is still too young, and therefore he would try by all means to hang on to power.
I don't think it's a question of youth. It's a question of whether you've done your job in the 2 terms you've had. And if he's done his job and he's satisfied that he's done his job, he should be ready to hand the reins over to somebody else, regardless of his age. It's boring to stay in the same job for a long time, Mpho.
I don't think so. I mean, Zimbabwe has a different story to tell.
Zimbabwe, Angola,
yeah,
Burkina Faso.
Perhaps let's get to Pretoria and hear what's your view in as far as this matter is concerned. What should happen with President Nkurunziza?
Well, I think let's just say that the Burundians are not satisfied with his governance, and that accounts for why, of course, they are calling for him not to go for a second term. And if he has done very well, I don't think that will be this kind of demonstration and disapproval of his candidacy. And having said that anyway, the argument of the government has been that technically he is qualified to go for in the second term. Yeah. And my take on that is that compromise is also part of politics. And if the president feels that the generality of Burundians are not happy with his governance, he should, of course, be satisfied with the number of time that he has already exercised power, and following the good example of President Goodluck Jonathan. And I think that is what he should do. Okay. Honorably, decline his candidacy for the interest of peace in Burundi.
But should there be a limit in terms of office?
Oh, certainly there should be a limit. Otherwise, we revert back to dictatorship.
But it can't be dictatorship if you continue to be voted in.
But it has to do with whether you are, whether the people constitutionally voted you in, or whether you are legitimately exercising power, or you rigged yourself into office. So that you bullied your way into office does not mean that the people have voted you in. We've witnessed this in Cameroon over the years, where the president kept winning election for 30-something years now. And not because the people are voting him in, but because he's manipulating the electoral processes and continue to be in power. And we see this happen in Zimbabwe. And this is not a good example of democracy. It's not a good example of what the continent wants to be with respect to Agenda 2063. So we need to see changes.
Okay, hold the thought there. We've got Sarah, you're calling us from Kenya. Sarah, welcome to Question Time. Go ahead. Sarah, can you hear us?
Oh, I can hear you. Is there a question coming in from your viewers?
Yes, I wanted you to just come in. Perhaps just give us, you know, the latest. What is happening in that part of the country? What is the mood like in as far as leadership is concerned? What should be happening in Burundi?
Well, things are currently very tense in Burundi, and particularly in the capital, Bujumbura. Protests broke out over a month ago now after the president's nomination to be the CNDD-FDD candidate in the elections. There's been a complete ban on protests. The police have broken up protests with excessive force, and the protests are increasingly getting violent. There's a radio silence in the media at the moment. Many of the radio stations have been destroyed, and human rights defenders are in hiding or have fled the country. So people are very scared, and the situation is quite serious.
Now, what is the way forward? We know that the elections have been proposed for the 6th of June. Is the situation on the ground conducive to hold such?
Well, the situation on the ground is very difficult. Independent media is barely reporting. Radio stations are off the air. It's very difficult for opposition parties not linked to the ruling party to campaign. So the situation is not very conducive at the moment to freedom of assembly and freedom of expression, which should accompany elections.
And the state of humanitarian aid for those who are either displaced or are fleeing the country or their locations?
Well, according to UNHCR, over 70,000 Burundians have fled Burundi. They've left to Rwanda, Democratic Republic of Congo, and Tanzania. And here the humanitarian situation is very difficult, and there are increasing reports of cholera emerging in the refugee camps in Tanzania.
And are you coping yourself as an NGO which has to be dealing also with displaced people?
Well, our primary focus is working on human rights documentation and reporting. So what we do is document the situation, we engage with the government on our findings, and we conduct advocacy both in-country with regional and international actors. So that's really what the Amnesty International movement of 7 million members, activists and supporters is doing at the moment. We're not providing direct humanitarian assistance to refugees. A number of humanitarian organizations are, however, doing this.
Okay. Sarah, thank you very much for that information. That was Sarah Jackson, who is the Deputy Regional Director of East of the Horn and the Great Lakes region, Amnesty International. We're taking a quick break. When we return, we'll be taking your calls on 089 110 4210. 089 110 4210. This is Question Time. Don't go away.
Hola, my gents. There are more than 22,000 voting stations in South Africa, but there's only one for you. That's the one where you registered. Your local station. Vote local, cause local is lekker. Finish and klaar.
Welcome back. You're still watching Question Time. My guest today, Aisha Kaji, is a political analyst. And from our Pretoria studios, Richard Irionya is also a political analyst. And we're welcoming your calls. The number to dial, 089 110 4210, or rather 089 110 4210. Now, Aisha, let's look at the Arusha Peace Deal. Does it get compromised by President Nkurunziza continuing to campaign?
Absolutely, because the Arusha Peace Deal was the basis of the current Burundian constitution. And even though the Constitutional Court in Burundi earlier this month said that he could contest a third term technically, the deputy president of the Constitutional Court actually fled the country and from outside the country in exile declared that this move was unconstitutional. So of course the peace agreement is being compromised. Of course tensions are running high in Burundi. We've heard that people are leaving the country in droves. It's a country that's had a long history of civil war. We don't want to see it return to that. And really what Mr. Nkurunziza is doing, not just in this third term bid, but also in the way he's manipulating the youth wing of the ruling party, the Imbonerakure, it's very, very reminiscent of what the Interahamwe were doing in Rwanda prior to the genocide there in 1994. So it should be worrying us all, frankly.
Okay. Perhaps we would also want to check, where is Nyombara at the moment?
He's in prison, apparently.
Okay. Nduna, you're calling us from Mpumalanga.
Yes, Paul, it's Nduna Machuga. I'm saying what we see in Burundi is sheer arrogance, non-respect to United Nations conventions on human rights, and African leaders must know that politics is a social contract based on the will of the people. If people on the ground are no more in favor of your social contract to lead them, the African leaders should respect that, and then make the rule of the law and constitutional principles to prevail in Africa. And this is sheer arrogance, what we see prevailing in Burundi, and we're saying Pan-Africanist Parliament, the African Union, the UN should convene, should intervene on this matter and force this man to step down. He must step down. Whom is he forcing to lead? Okay. Whom does he want to lead? Because the social contract that is signed with the people on the ground has been broken by the peaceful protest that we see on the ground.
Okay. Thanks very much, Nduna. Perhaps let's check with Mr. Irionya there. Can African leaders persuade President Nkurunziza not to stand without interfering in the affairs of an autonomous country?
Yes, it all depends on how they pressure him, to not to contest, the forthcoming election that he has actually, postponed. He needs to be reminded of the implications of Burundi and reverting back to civil war. and when, of course, the consequences of this of the war and it's still being felt very much in the country. Now, if the people are not willing to accept you again, or majority of the people are not willing that you continue, to rule them, then of course the most natural thing to do and logical thing to do is to step aside for the interest of peace. But when but when you remain in power, the AU has not stated clearly that the African states need to intervene militarily to force him out, except, of course, the situation degenerate into a civil war, as we witnessed in the case of Ivory Coast. Then you can call for intervention. But at this point, it has not called for intervention. This is time to still allow for democracy, for the diplomacy to prevail. And I think they have asked for a longer term of postponement so as to be able to persuade the president not to contest the election. And the extent to which they will succeed will depend on the degree of pressure they can put on Nkurunziza. John, you're calling us from Cape Town. Welcome.
Yes. What I was thinking at least these African leaders, if they can stay for at least 2 terms, which is 10 years, that would be quite reasonable. But now the problem again with most of the African leaders, they've overstayed also. So it's not possible for them to tell Nkurunziza what to do when in their own backyard they are also doing the same thing. But Africa is interlinked in a way that if we don't tell each other the truth, we're still going to have these economic problems again, flocking to your own countries again because you didn't want to tell that leader of a certain country the truth of what he's doing is wrong.
Okay.
So I think African leaders, they are the ones who are supposed to really rise to the challenge, to tell each other the truth and really stick to their constitution.
Are they occupying a higher moral ground here?
They're not, actually. ECOWAS tried earlier this month. They tabled a resolution to ban third terms in the West African region, but that resolution was shut down, or should I rather say shouted down. And in fact, even in the East African region, we've got people like Paul Kagame, who's had 2 7-year terms, and who now has collected, there's been 2 million signatures collected and sent to the Rwandan parliament to request that he be able to stand for a third term. And he's been quite ambivalent on this. So it seems that even he is considering it. Certainly his reputation is going to suffer, but and the high moral ground he's thus far occupied to a large extent is surely going to be eroded.
But why do people look only at Africa? I mean, Russia.
It happens
Vladimir
everywhere.
Putin was leading. He gave way to Medvedev and came back.
Through the back door.
Exactly. Yes. But people don't make as much noise as they do if it was an African leader.
Perhaps it's because in Africa, the situations that we've had where presidents have been in power for, in some cases, 3 decades. You think of Mr. Mugabe, you think of Dos Santos in Angola, you think of Bashir in Sudan, you think of Museveni, who's coming up for another term next year, who ironically has been asked to mediate in this crisis. You've got all these leaders, really old, aging leaders, who've been in power for 30 years, and their people, the vast majority of their people are still very poor, very underdeveloped, and very, very living in very conditions of real scarcity.
Okay. Courage. You have never known any other leader except the current one, and I think you're very happy with President Mugabe.
Absolutely, Mpo. I'm very happy with our revolutionary president. I mean, he's a very good example worldwide. His leadership skills and what he has done so far is what we as the people of Zimbabwe want. And you know what, going directly to the question that you posed earlier on, who has, the people who have the right to choose how long a president stays in power are the people of that particular country. So they are the ones also who contribute to the constitution that dictates the number of terms and years a president sits. So let's just respect that. This issue that's happening in Burundi, where Nkurunziza is being pointed to say you should go, you should not stand for the coming term, is absolutely wrong. Let's look at what the constitution of Burundi is saying. It's clear. It has to be 2 terms, and he has not yet served 2 terms, as president, who has been elected by the simple rank and file of Burundi. So let it be. Who are we to come and dictate what Burundi should do? Who is anyone to come and tell us as Zimbabweans what to do? They should leave us alone. This tendency of dictating to African states, meddling in their political affairs should cease. Why are they doing it to African nations only?
Okay. Leave us alone, says courage.
If that were true, Mpo, if it were really true,
yeah, I'll give you a chance just now.
That most citizens of those countries want those leaders to remain in power, then answer one question. Why are they torturing their own citizens who oppose them, imprisoning them, killing them, forcing them to flee the countries, etc.? In Burundi alone, since 2010, according to a UN report that was tabled last week,
yes,
more than 22 opposition activists have been killed in the last 5 years.
Okay, let's go to Tswani and perhaps entertain that. You wanted to pose a question.
No, not just a question, but a contribution. Now, you did mention about Russia, and I do not think that Vladimir Putin came from the back door to occupy the position again. He respected the constitution that limited him to, of course, 2 terms. And that is what African leaders have not emulated. And after the expiration, that he was qualified again to contest the election. But first and foremost, he stepped aside.
All right.
And in this case of Africans, so they have been ruling for 30 years. No, it's unacceptable.
All right, Zondi,
no
you are in
how
Gauteng.
effective you think you are as a president. Yeah.
Zondi?
Yes, sir, I'm in Gauteng.
Yes.
Yes, what I liked about, I'm just supporting what Courage has said about President Mugabe.
Okay.
Yeah, there's nothing that in any constitution that says someone must rule how many terms in office. I think that is correct. Just look at Israel, that guy. How long has it been there in office?
Who's that?
There's no one who's saying anything. Okay, everything that is said.
Well, Netanyahu is the same as Putin. I mean, he lost and then he came back.
Yeah, it's just like Putin.
Okay.
And that guy in Israel.
That's right. Okay.
And everything that is said all the time is said about Africa, Africa, Africa.
All right. Thanks very much, Zondi. A quick one. Let's close. Your closing remarks.
My closing remarks. African leaders really need to put the interests of their citizens at heart. Leaders everywhere, including African leaders, need to put the interests of their citizens at heart. If they were providing the services and the benefits that their citizens need, then if they wanted to remain in power till kingdom come, perhaps it would not be such a big issue.
Give me names.
Mr. Mugabe, Mr. Dos Santos, Mr. Bashir, Nassim Bear of Togo. Yeah. Lots of them.
Okay. Let's leave it there. We've run out of time, unfortunately. That was question time for today. A big thank you to our guests and to you for watching the show. We welcome your feedback via email. Question time at sabc.co.za. Our Twitter handle at questiontime24. From me and the rest of the crew, have yourself a wonderful time. Goodbye.
Welcome to Network, a technology news program that also discusses what's trending in social media in and around Africa. MTN has launched its new movie and television streaming service, Front Row. If it's trending, we will find it. That's Network with me, Spumelele Zondi, every Sunday at 7:30 p.m. only on the SABC News Channel.
The issue becomes on how you do what you want to do in effecting change. Change has to happen. There's no question about that.
African heroes who have not been feted, who do not have the statues and the memorials.
We misunderstood reconciliation to mean status quo should be preserved in some instances.
I was asking people who are managing Hector Peterson, they said to us, no, the person who's cleaning the area, an ordinary person, not even the curator, somebody who's cleaning, the area there, an ordinary person in the street will fight with you if you do anything wrong with those statues.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
It is important for everyone to know food safety practices and make sure that their food is prepared safely from farm to the plate.
Who ensures that there's compliance?
In terms of all the abattoirs, they have to be registered. So when they are being registered, they are actually audited fully to make sure that the structural requirements as well as the hygiene requirements are met.
Most bacteria and viruses cannot withstand the normal cooking temperatures that we use to cook our food.
The bigger retailers cannot be seen as being insensitive to the food safety requirements.
There are many consumers that actually go shopping with a cooler box and ice packs so that they don't break the cold chain, because a few hours outside the temperature that it should be already shortens the shelf life of that product.
Join me on Health Talk every Saturday morning between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. as we unpack current health stories.